campaign, as you know, Corey, and people keep saying, oh, Trump's going to change, he's going to be different, he's going to so-called pivot, which I think that ought to be put in a lockbox, that word, because Trump was tough tonight. This, we were talking about whether he's going to soften on immigration, what his policy would be on mass deportation. There's a little bit of confusion here to me, and we can talk about that later. But I do think that he made it very clear that those who are today illegally, who are seeking legal status, they will have one route and only one route, to return home and apply for re-entry. There is a little bit of confusion later on in the speech to me, but I do believe that this was tough. It was build the wall. It was Mexico's paying for it, and there was no softening here that I could see.
Except for the confusing part that you found. We'll discuss that.
Right.
But I want to get everyone's impression of this. David Axelrod, you next. Was it effective? What are your impressions?
Well, I think if the goal was to expand his base, no, I don't think it was effective. I think that any Hispanic voter who was listening was probably not wooed by this speech. I don't think those suburban college-educated voters who have been fleeing him would be wooed by this speech, because it was not just tough in substance, but tough in tone, in the very way that makes people uncomfortable, or at least the people who haven't come to Trump. So I think it probably thrilled his base, but I don't think it did much to expand it. And as we've discussed before, I don't think his base is large enough to win an election. So you said at the beginning, Don, that this may be the most important day of Donald Trump's campaign, but it wasn't necessarily a day in which he advanced his election.
Michael Smirkanis, do you agree with the assessment so far?
I agree with David. On a 1 to 10, I give this speech a 10 for the base that he already has. But for the base that he needs to expand to reach to win a general election, it's probably a 1.5 or a 2. I mean, it's so clear to me now, 75 or so days out, and frankly, that's a misnomer. Early voting is going to begin at the end of September, so it's game on right now. It's clear to me that the Trump strategy is one of squeezing every last white vote that's left in this country. But the demographics have shifted, and you just can't win the White House on that model alone. By the way, if this is a policy speech, imagine what the State of the Union looks like.
Corey Lewandowski. Corey, I think you believe that the speech was effective. How do you respond to the rest of the panel? He did not expand the base. This was probably to strengthen his core base that he already has.
I think Donald Trump's message tonight was the message that he started with back on June of 2015, which was America first. That's what he believes, and what he's playing to, and if you look at the polling data, he's got about an 18-point lead in the demographic of white males who are voting in this election. They have a high propensity of voting, and so he's got about an 18-point lead on Hillary Clinton in that particular demographic. This speech is clearly geared at those individuals right now to make sure that they are there. He's locked them in for the election, and now he's going to have to go and expand. There's no question about it. But this speech right here, America First, is something that has got him to this point, and he's doubled down on it tonight.
Bakari?
I actually agree with Corey. I think Corey's analysis of the speech was right, hit the nail on the head. This speech was nationalism on steroids. I think it's actually fair to say that it had some Willie Horton type feel, especially along the beginning of it. But one of the things that stuck out to me the most, and one of the most disturbing things, and I think one of the reasons why you're going to see the best GOTV mechanism we have in the Democratic Party is Donald Trump, is because of things like policy point number 5 in here, in which he talked about deporting dreamers. I mean, we're talking about people, this is the only country they know. And I hope we get a chance to talk about that as the show progresses. But even they have to leave. I mean, these people who have grown up, gone to college here, graduated, and are productive citizens, you know, many young people especially stand with dreamers. And so for me, that was something that was a gut punch. And it's just not the America that I believe in, but it is the America that Donald Trump started with 14 months ago.
Mark Preston, is it fair to say that this speech was one of fear to many people, but it may be effective in that some people have concerns with what Donald Trump talked about in that speech?
Well, let's just go back about 8 or 9 hours where Donald Trump
seemed to be delivering a different message when he was down in Mexico with the Mexican president, and then where we are now, where he goes and delivers basically the same speech that he had been delivering all through the Republican primary, through the beginning of the summer. Let me just say from a stagecraft standpoint, he offered a 10-point plan. A lot of those points overlap one another. I don't necessarily think he had to offer 10 specific points that could have been folded into one another. I also think that it would have been smarter done had he had the families, the mothers, the fathers of those who had lost children, family members on stage, because I think that would have been more effective at that moment, as opposed to just having them come up at the end and say their piece. But to Michael's point as well, Donald Trump said at the very beginning that this won't be a rally speech, it will be a detailed policy address. I don't think it was really that detailed. I mean, it was broad, and there was a lot of promises that were put forth. He didn't explain how things were actually going to happen, and I think when somebody says we're going to offer a detailed policy address, you would expect mechanisms about how you're going to put these actions into play.
David Axelrod, did you get any policy out of there, how he's going to put these actions into play, like Mark Preston said?
Well, there was policy in there. It seems like he's going to defund most of the largest cities in America, which would come under the category of those sanctuary cities he was talking about. Literally, almost the entire list of the largest cities in America would be defunded. He repeated that he would have an ideological test for people who want to come into the country. I mean, these are meaty proposals that are going to be wildly controversial and debated hotly. But I really think, Don, we ought to just step back for 1 second and say that the image that Donald Trump presented tonight of undocumented workers, of these folks who are here illegally, is not. It doesn't comport with the reality. The vast majority of them are law-abiding people, and the fact is that they're doing jobs. They're staples in communities around the country. Some of them may even be working in Mr. Trump's properties. I don't know, but they're doing work. They're productive. They're raising families here. As Bakari mentioned, a lot of these young people, some of them serve in the military. It is a disservice to those people to create this sort of dystopian, nightmarish caricature of them based on a few. And I think that's one of the reasons why not only are minority voters going to be turned off, but I think that a lot of other voters are going to be turned off by that as well. In that sense, it wasn't really a serious speech. It was an effort to rally, once again, rally the base. And Corey's right. This is the base that got him the nomination, and Corey deserves credit for being part of that campaign. The problem is that was 13 million voters who voted for Donald Trump, and now he needs 65 million, and this is not what we saw tonight was not the politics of addition.
Michael Smerconish, I just want to ask you, does this seem like a generalization and a criminalizing or criminalization of immigrants in this country, even though he was speaking of illegal immigrants, but did it come off that way?
Well, Don, I listened to the speech and I followed a transcript as he was speaking, and perhaps someone will correct me, but I think he left completely undefined the 11 million, if that's the number, who are here, who are not committing criminal acts. There was no discussion of a deportation force, and well, I mean, I want to know what's the plan with the 11 million, because if he articulated it, I'm still in the dark about it.
Yeah, he said, under my administration, anyone who illegally crosses the border will be detained until they are removed out of this country. And then there is a soundbite with him that we will get to in the next block where he talked about if you came here illegally, what will happen.
I think Michael's right.
Don, wait a minute. It's totally impractical to think that 11 million people are going to listen to this and they're going to say, well, I guess it's time for me to leave and then come back in and get to the back. That's totally impractical. Right. Is that the plan? That's not a plan.
Or is the plan, Michael, to have people live in the shadows, right? And it's unclear. Aside from a couple million criminals and the visa overstays, what would you do with the rest of everyone? And that's where I got a little confused, because at one point in the speech he said, in several years, then and only then will we be in a position to consider the appropriate disposition of those who remain. So it's confusing.
But he says in several years when we have accomplished all of our enforcement goals and truly ended illegal immigration for good, including the construction of a Great Wall and the establishment of our new lawful immigration system, then and only then will we be in a position to consider the appropriate disposition of those who remain.
So that's deliberately vague, I think. The other thing that's sort of confusing to me, and aside from the points that have been made about Donald Trump continuing to play to his base, which is what I think he's doing here, is that he's continuing to make the election really about him. When in fact, why wouldn't Donald Trump make the election about Hillary Clinton? Given her unpopularity, I mean, he's just as unpopular, but this speech refocuses again the election. I mean, he had a week in talking about Hillary Clinton's emails and the rest. He had a week where he could shift it to Hillary Clinton, and it's back on this election is about Donald Trump, and those, I don't know that he changed anyone's mind tonight.
But he did mention Hillary Clinton and the president. He said President Barack Obama, President Obama and Hillary Clinton have engaged in a gross dereliction of duty by surrendering the safety of American people to our open borders.
But see, Donald Trump's immigration policy is rooted in a lot of falsehoods. I mean, first, net migration from Mexico is 0. We know that. We also know that the president, although it's not one of my favorite statistics, that he's also deported 2.8 million people. We know that a year ago they actually started the process where they were strengthening and going and actually deporting many of these criminals. But Donald Trump's thesis tonight, I mean, a lot of the things that he said, I mean, they just have to offend the common notion of America. Just one line. He says that we want to develop an immigration system to choose immigrants based on merit, skill, and proficiency. I mean, what about those people who come over and may not have all of the different attributes, or may just be coming for just to actually learn how to start a small business or find a job and do all of these things. That's extreme. That's not America.
But I want to hear from you.
It's extreme vetting. It's also, if you look at who this plays to, and if you look at the recent polling, particularly in a state like Wisconsin, where Hillary Clinton had a large lead just 10 days ago, and today's poll have her, 3 points or 5 points, depending on when you look at it. You look at the national polls, where the race is tightened significantly, and let's exclude the state of Florida, which is the #1 battleground state in the country right now. States like Ohio, Pennsylvania. This speech is directly at those people living in Ohio who have thought, for whatever reason, that their country is not what it was when they grew up, that they want to see the country the way it used to be. That's their perception of it. And what Donald Trump is talking about specifically is in those battleground states, and I've seen it across the country, those are the people, the working class individuals, who want to go back to what they recall the country was when they were growing up. It's very different.
College-educated voters.
You mentioned it. Choose immigrants based on merit, skill, and proficiency. And a viewer emailed me and said, is he talking about choosing people based on merit? None of my poor Irish laborer ancestors would have made it.
I mean, no. I mean, I think it's absurd, and it should offend the notion of common decency and what it means to be American. And to Corey's point, I mean, I understand that some people, and I use some people, and you can characterize that as whomever, but some people want America to go back to where it wasn't as brown as it is today.
All right, stand by, everyone. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. I'm here with my panel, Gloria Borger, David Axelrod, Michael Smerconish, Corey Lewandowski, Mikari Sellers, and Mark Preston. We're continuing our conversation. Donald Trump just delivered his speech on immigration in Arizona. Mikari Sellers, you have the floor.
And I know Mark was trying to chime in, and to Corey's point, I'll just be as blunt as possible, but there are not enough white men in the United States of America for Donald Trump to be president.
It's about putting America first, which means better trade deals, putting people back to work in cities like Detroit, in Baltimore. Those aren't predominantly white cities.
Nothing about this speech today would empower those people. Nothing about that speech today would create those concrete proposals to put people back to work. I mean, what this did, to David Axelrod's point, was bastardize an entire group of people. And yes, there are some illegal immigrants that are criminals. We know 690,000. But there are another 10.5 million people that deserve a chance.
What to do with people who are here illegally? Here's what Donald Trump said just moments ago about that.
For those here illegally today who are seeking legal status, they will have one route and one route only: to return home and apply for re-entry like everybody else under the rules
You like it with a shirt off,
Those who
James?
leftist entry
What?
under
You like
this
it this
new
way?
system,
What way?
and it will
Like
be
this?
an efficient
Oh,
system,
yeah.
will not be awarded
You
surplus
can feel the
visas.
wind and air, right?
Will have to
Yeah,
apply
I like
for
it.
entry under the immigration
Then when it
caps
gets
or
cold,
limits
it's snow,
that
but...
will be established in the future. We will break the cycle of amnesty and illegal immigration. We will break the cycle. There will be no amnesty. Our message to the world will be this: you cannot obtain legal status or become a citizen of the United States by illegally entering our country. Can't do it. This declaration alone will help stop the crisis of illegal crossings and illegal overstays, very importantly. People will know that you can't just smuggle in, hunker down, and wait to be legalized. Not going to work that way. Those days are over.
So to David Axelrod, you know, this Donald Trump is saying all
Here
these
we
things.
go
Many
again.
people will
Let's
run
try
for
it
president,
again.
make lots of promises. Maybe he can get it done, but it all depends. You know, Washington, it all depends on the Congress, and he just can't do it alone.
Yes, I know he rails against executive orders, but he seems to feel like he can accomplish this by fiat. You know, one thing that interests me, Don, is both Mr. Trump and Corey now are citing polls. For the last few weeks, we haven't heard a lot from Donald Trump about polls. In fact, he a couple of, not more than a week or so ago, he said they were rigged, they were phony. So apparently these deficiencies in the polls have now been repaired.
Yes, they have. Yeah.
And he's
They
back
fixed those, so
to
we appreciate them fixing those mistakes. Thank you.
But what isn't true? What is not true is that his any poll numbers that have changed have not changed because of the things he said about immigration over the last 10 days. Because what he said about immigration over the last 10 days until tonight was pretty much of a muddle. I think that Secretary Clinton has had some difficulties in the last week. That's more likely to have driven some of these numbers. But there's nothing that I've seen that suggests that the race has tightened because of anything that he said about immigration. And it certainly, and those polls wouldn't reflect what he said tonight.
Michael Smirkonish, I started this analysis by saying this was probably the most important speech of Donald Trump's campaign so far. Again, having to clarify comments that he made about immigration earlier this week and last week. Did he do an effective job of clarifying what has been viewed as a flip-flop?
It gives him the opportunity to tell his supporters that he presented a 10-point plan, but I think that anyone who takes the time to study that which he actually said is going to be left with more questions than he answered. And one other point, if I might, all politics are local. For me, that means the suburbs of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania and the exurbs. And my measuring stick is to listen to a speech like this and ask whether it plays among my neighbors who are largely educated, college educated, and largely Republican. It's a group that he is struggling with, and I don't think that the tone earned him any favor. Frankly, the Donald Trump who was in Mexico City today would play well with my neighbors, but not the Donald Trump who spoke tonight.
It was very interesting as you're watching, I'm watching in the office and then on the set, it was to compare the two, him
Right.
there with, you know, the president of Mexico,
Oh, exactly.
and then in this speech, it is jarring. It's two different things.
Which is why I think people anticipated a different Donald Trump tonight.
Right.
And myself included, I must say, and that didn't happen. So, as I say, put the word pivot in the lockbox and put it away, because this is Donald Trump. And to Michael's good point, Mitt Romney won those college-educated white voters by 14 points, and he lost the election.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has to do at least as well. I understand Corey's point that he has to appeal to, you know, working class whites, but the college-educated voters are something he needs that Republicans normally win. Now, maybe you could do it without them, Corey, but I don't think so. And I thought this whole shift was to getting those, Republican suburban women in particular who have some concerns about him being an intemperate candidate, for example, getting them into sort of his camp if they're still persuadable. I don't see anything in the speech tonight that would really get him any extra
Before you
votes
respond,
from
Corey,
those
let
folks.
me ask you this question, because I think it's along the lines of the way you'll answer it, and I'm going to channel from the last time. Remember the last time we all sat here with Kellyanne Conway and said, what about, she said to me, what about the substance? What about the substance? The tone is not that important. Gloria and Michael Smerconish are both saying the tone was important. Two different people, if you put them back to back, than what happened in Mexico and happened in Arizona. Will that play with the people he's trying to get?
I think you have to remember what the networks do a lot of times. I think what people look at is a specific subset of the population that Donald Trump is not doing well with today. And this is where we were 2 weeks ago in the African American community. What has he done since then?
Nothing.
He's made a speech. He's going to Detroit. He's going to a black community in Detroit to do specific outreach. We saw it in the last NBC poll. He was polling at 8% amongst the African American population, which is 2% higher than Mitt Romney got and 100% higher than John McCain got. No one wants to talk about that. What they're doing today is the latest poll that's out today. They're saying, here's the subset of the demographic that Donald Trump is not doing well, and this speech didn't talk about that. There are 69 days left in this election. And so let's give him the same opportunity we gave him today to clarify his position on immigration. I think he's been very, very clear tonight that there's no more ambiguity of what his position is on immigration. He's laid out very clearly, very succinctly. And so let's let his words stand for themselves.
Michael Smerconish said he can tell his supporters that he laid out a 10-point plan. He wasn't sure that it's clear. Listen, that's up to you guys to decide that. But let me just get you saying that he's polling higher with African Americans than John McCain, and
John McCain gets 4% of the African American
What's up in the
Mitt Romney
elephant
gets 6.
okay, but he's got
30% jumping elephants.
He gets
That's
8.
actually, that's an outlier. What you're looking at is one poll
They're
that
on the
needs
shit
to clarify
out of
about
them.
this new African American outreach that Donald Trump's doing.
150,000 elephants
because
gone.
he's not actually going to speak to an African American community. Instead, he's having a one-on-one interview with Bishop Wayne T. Jackson. So that is not the case. He's not going to speak to a black audience.
He's also speaking to the largest African American network in the country. He's doing
a one-on-one interview.
Well, I know, but that's like saying doing a one-on-one interview and not talking to anybody.
But it's also not in front of an African American audience, which
it's the largest African American network in the country they're speaking to.
But I think that's the largest African American network in the country.
So that's neither here nor there, because one of the things that people wanted Donald Trump to be able to do was actually go into these communities of color and have conversations directly with them, not speak at them in a rally or interview or anything else, but actually, if you're going to go to a church, actually speak to the congregation. That actually would be outreach. But some of the things that I didn't get out of this speech, which we talked about earlier, we got to the point of the wall that he was going to build on the southern border, but we still don't know. We still don't have any clarity on how it's going to get paid for. We talked about the increase in ICE agency.
But they're admitting there are mountains now. They can't, it's
so but there are a lot of questions that still come from this. I mean, not only do we have to talk about the immigrants that will still be in the shadows, but we have some very, very interesting questions that Donald Trump left unanswered tonight. I mean, we don't even know. We don't know how this wall is going to be paid for. I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
No, he said.
Before we get to the break, I want to give you the last word in this segment, because you're going to be talking to your listeners.
And he said how he's going to pay for the Middle East. He's going to make everybody pay for it but us.
Hear from them. How do you think that the American public is going to respond to this specific speech or this day from Donald Trump?
I don't think that the net is that I don't think that the needle was moved. I think that as the day began, the day probably ended. I come back to one data set. George Herbert Walker Bush got 59% of the white vote in 1992. It earned him 426 electoral votes. Mitt Romney got precisely the same share of the white vote, and he only got 206 electoral votes. The country has changed. Donald Trump doesn't seem to recognize that.
I take that back. I'm going to give David Axelrod the final word. Sorry about that, Michael. Go ahead, David.
But I'd say to Corey, I don't know whether that poll that had Trump getting 8% of the black vote was right, or the one that came out the other day that said he had a 0% favorable and a 97% unfavorable among black voters. But I am willing to, based on all the data that I've seen, I'm willing to make a friendly wager with you right now that he won't do better than Mitt Romney did in 2012. I mean, I don't see it. But will
I'll
someone will
take
be
that
right,
wager,
someone will
David.
be wrong, and
I'll
someone's
take
going to
that
pay for
wager. 6%
someone's going to pay
is
for a
the
dinner.
number.
And you guys,
6% is the number, right?
All right.
you guys are
Okay.
doing it in
All right,
front,
exactly.
in front of a live, large audience.
We have
Yeah,
witnesses.
You've got witnesses, and it's
Great.
on tape. All right, thank you, everyone. Stick around.
Yeah,
Some of
Trump's
you will
a
be
long
back,
one.
others
See, it's
will
only
not.
9%
Again, we're
right
discussing
now.
Donald Trump's speech on immigration tonight in Arizona.
I wanna
and
get all this
today
up. Why not, huh?
Also meeting with Mexico's president earlier in the day. We'll be right
We
back.
can always get it anytime we want it if I put it up and use their
You
service.
inherit lots of traits from your family. My ancestor, Lady Beatrice, introduced the Elizabethan rough. Great-grandfather Horatio went
And I'm
west
going to
during the
put all
Gold
of
Rush.
this on
And Aunt Susan
hard
was the
drives, and
world
we're going to put it on our
champion. Inherited
servers.
their can-do spirit and their double chin. Now I'm going to do something about it.
Kybella is the first of its kind injectable treatment that